Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show. Today's date is Tuesday, January 14th. And you know what that means, John? John Combest, you know what that means?
No, I don't know. What does that mean, Brad?
It's a month until you can you can corner the market on all the flowers because you've got those 40,000 girlfriends of yours that you got to make sure that you put in your computer system. They all get delivered on the same time, on the same day, on February 14th. So you got a month to plan that out, John.
40,000 is an understatement, Brad. I think you're really minimizing the size of our audience here on the BJ Show.
That is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. Every single day he wakes up early. As early as Mark McCluskey. Did I say that right? McCluskey?
You did, but you know what? I don't get into the world record overhead military press workout in, Brad.
Yeah, well, but he gets his verbal and keyboard work in early. That's what that John does. Anyway, he puts together this great website. He's done it for over 23 years. JohnCombest.com, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. Just like it sounds, JohnCombest.com. You hear him in the background there, moving the computers around, making sure everything's just right. But what we do is we bring in this guy right here. Well, hold on a minute. Let me try it again. We bring in this guy right here.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what he does is he counts them down. Right, Casey?
And here they are.
And we start off with...
In third place...
A familiar face was in Jefferson City yesterday. That's right. U.S. Senator Eric Schmitt made a triumphant return to the Missouri Capitol to watch his friend and former colleague, Mike Kehoe, get inaugurated as governor yesterday. We just might get to the inauguration later in the top three, Brad, but I want to highlight an interview that Eric Schmitt did with Ashley Byrd, B-Y-R-D, from MissouriNet. She covered a wide range of topics. You know, she asked the perfunctory questions about what he expects from Mike Kehoe. And the senator said some pleasant complimentary things about Mike Kehoe. But what was interesting is this Ashley Byrd woman pushed Eric Schmitt on the idea that the United States was going to take over Greenland. And Eric Schmitt was like, well, no, that's not actually the discussion. The United States could hypothetically purchase Greenland from Denmark. And Eric Schmitt also talked about something that you and I talked about in the top three yesterday, Brad, which is the potential of a TikTok ban. And Eric Schmitt does support the idea of forcing TikTok to be sold to a company. And the analogy he's given, Brad, is similar to one that you gave over the last few weeks, which is, you know, in World War II, if Nazi Germany owned a whole bunch of technology that allowed them to listen to and watch things that all kinds of Americans were communicating among themselves, we wouldn't have let that happen. So Eric Schmitt is in favor of a TikTok ban. It sounds like, Brad, based on the discussion that we had yesterday, that it just might come to a little bit of brinksmanship here as we get close to January 19th. But anyway, it's the top link on my website today. It's a federal story, and it's via MissouriNet.
And we move on with...
Up a notch to number 2.
Brad, you are a student of St. Louis, having spent your entire lifetime here, minus some travel to Des Moines, Iowa. Does the name Henry Shaw in St. Louis ring a bell?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. There's a garden named after him.
And what do you associate Henry Shaw with in the St. Louis area?
Botany, plants, things like that, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Well, because of your white privilege, Brad, you neglect to mention that Henry Shaw was a slave owner. Did you know that, Brad?
Here we go again. No, I did not, John, but you're going to inform me of that, right?
You are the poster boy for exactly why a little bit of taxpayer dollars needed to amend what's wrong with the Brad Hildebrands of the world. Henry Shaw was a slave owner, Brad. And because of your voluntary ignorance about this fact, the National Park Service has given $99,920 to help folks understand that the land where the Missouri Botanical Garden is today, Brad, that used to house slaves. How do you feel about that, Brad?
John, you know, It just drives me nuts with all this, this. Remember when? I mean, things change. You know what I mean? Wasn't Charles Lindbergh a friend of Adolf Hitler? Wasn't that the deal? Wasn't he like pro-communist or something like that? Wasn't the deal with Lindbergh? Wasn't that it?
Yeah, I think so. But in his defense, they have his airplane hanging at Lambert Airport. And I have it on good authority because that all the airports are no longer functional, Brad. All the terminals are no longer functional. I heard that you have a bid in to get that old Lindbergh plane that's hanging up at Lambert.
I don't think it's there anymore. I think they took it down a long time ago. I really don't think it's there.
Wow, you're taking credit for stealing the Lindbergh plane. Maybe you'll take credit for the Lindbergh baby too, Brad. No. But anyway, there was a fantastic quote in the Post-Dispatch, and let me make sure I get this correct here. A quote from the woman from the Botanical Gardens, and you're really going to love her title. I'll read it to you in a second here, Brad. Receiving this grant will enable – oh, I'm sorry here, Brad. We got a little traffic thing here. Receiving this grant will enable us to advance our efforts in raising awareness and providing education about a difficult yet vital chapter of history. That quote is from Michelle Martin Bonner. Brad, she has the best title I think we've ever heard on the show, which is Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. It's not DEI anymore, Brad. It's Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. DIB. I got dibs on dib, Brad.
John, don't you think that money could have been how much money was it again?
Exactly $99,920. And I'm glad you asked that, Brad, because the broader National Park Service program is exactly $500,000, $500,000, which is dedicating to looking at sites, thinking about, where slaves might have stood. I'm sorry, it's hard to say this without laughing. Thinking about the role that slavery might have played in some of the grounds where we have parks, and really educating people. We saw just moments ago that a man with an encyclopedic knowledge of the St. Louis area didn't even know that Henry Shaw was the devil.
Well, okay, first off, is the $99,999, whatever the hell it was, is this like a St. Louis school board deal where they can only, if they can give out grants, they can't, anything over $50,000 has to be approved by the board, but if it's $49,999.99, it could just slide right through. Is that this kind of a deal again?
I thought the exact same thing, so I don't know why it is. I'm guessing that every group got round about $100,000. I'm guessing they gave out $5,000. I didn't dig deep enough to know the answer to that question, honestly.
Interesting. Okay, we ready for number one?
Well, I would just point out, before we get into story number one, Brett, I would point out that your white privilege here underscores a lot of what we've seen. And for example, when you think about Missouri's next governor, the definition of white privilege, Mike Kehoe was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Did you know that, Brad? He was born in the lap of luxury. He's had everything handed to him. People like Brad Hildebrand and Mike Kehoe are the reason why we need these grants, Brad, because you guys have grown up in extreme privilege, and you need to be taught a little bit of a lesson.
Now hold on a minute. Now, who says he was born who said that again?
John Combest says that.
No. I mean, but I thought you were quoting somebody. Okay.
No, Brad. I'm just leading us into story number one.
Okay, because of the fact that you and I have discussed the fact that Mike Kehoe was born in North City, and remember, I talked to him earlier this month. Remember, I went up to him at the 10th anniversary of the St. Charles County Police, and I said to him up front, I go, I understand you started at a very young age working for Dave Sinclair. And he says, yes. He says, I was 15 years old. I worked in the wash bay at Dave Sinclair Ford. I rode the bus back and forth between Dave Sinclair's dealership and my house in North City. And I think his mother was a single mother. I think he was doesn't he have 5 siblings or something like that as well, too?
He does. And I believe the dad walked out I believe Mike Kehoe was 2 when his dad walked out.
God, you see, these are the kind of people. And hopefully they don't become jerks. And, I think Mike Kehoe is going to do some good things as governor. Although it's sort of interesting. I heard some interesting thing this morning on 97.1, a guy discussing how he's part of the blunt cabal. Do you know about this whole thing?
Is he part of the swamp?
Yes, he's part of the swamp.
Oh, that's right. He's a swamp creature. Okay.
And Tracy and Rick Ellis will never invite him on their radio station because he's one of them. But See, to me, this is, people are going to go, oh, here goes Brad again. This is Brad fly the flag. This is America. A guy who can be born, in a household where his dad, abandons them. His mother raises him and 5 other siblings, and he becomes the governor of the state. You know what I'm saying? I mean, does that happen in England? Can you just one day wake up in the morning and go oh, today I'm going to be the king? No, you got to be on the bloodline, or at least marry into the bloodline. You know what I'm saying?
This is not a good application to be the next diversity, inclusion, and belonging leader at the Missouri Botanical Garden, Brad. I think we're going to have to delete this audio.
Okay. And we ready for number 1 now?
We are.
The number 1.
It was a joyous day in Jefferson City yesterday, Brad. Mike Kehoe, former state senator, former automotive dealer, former lieutenant governor, former appointee of good old Natty Blunt and the Blunt administration, was installed as governor of the great state of Missouri. It was cold. Governor Kehoe had his talk short. He was considerate, as I understand it, to the people that were freezing their bones off outside, and just had a beautiful moment. But Brad, it wasn't all fun and games during the day. Mike Kehoe signed a number of executive orders, and they're focused on law and order. In short, Brad, I have a number of pieces about this up today. They would encourage different law enforcement agencies to work more closely when it comes to capturing illegals, making sure we can get them deported, making sure, well, I shouldn't say deported, making sure that we can report them to authorities as proper in terms of in terms of ICE and in terms of, the federal immigration authorities. So I have a series of pieces up today that talk about some of those executive orders. It was nice for the governor, in my opinion, to spend his very first act surrounded by law enforcement, set the tone of what he's going to focus on. There's a million things that the governor could choose to spend his time on. He's clearly showing that law and order and crime are his top priority.
Why didn't Parson do this? Parson's the law enforcement dude. Why didn't he do this?
Well, I think Parson would say that he did plenty in terms of law enforcement, Brad.
Well, okay. Let's go back to Eric Greitens, who is still maligned. Okay, I still remember this press conference. It made an impression on me where Eric Greitens decided he was going to help out the city police department. Do you remember this whole situation? You know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember this, no.
Okay, Eric Greitens decided that the city police, because there's this crazy weird thing. This goes back decades. That when I was a police dispatcher, way back when, that the Missouri Highway Patrol has an unwritten rule. They don't go on the interstates in the city of St. Louis. You will rarely ever see a Missouri Highway Patrolman on 44 or 55 or 64, any of those, or 70. You won't see them. And the reason for that is this goes back decades, that the city essentially says, hey, we're just fine. You stay away, state. So what Greitens did was, Greitens decided, you know what, crime in the city is terrible. What we need to do is we need to take every available police officer in the city and put them on crime detail, put them on, crime prevention and stuff like that. So he essentially ordered the Missouri Highway Patrol to come into the city and patrol the interstates and work the accidents, whereas, the city would normally do that. Essentially take away the traffic detail from the city of St. Louis and take those officers off a traffic detail and put them into the city to fight crime. And oh my God, did he get pushed back from who was the mayor at the time? Was that still?
It was probably Lyda Crewson, wasn't it?
I believe it was Lyda Crewson, and I believe that was the first regime, the first session when Kim Gardner was there. And if I'm not mistaken, she snubbed the governor, wouldn't talk to him. Little did he know, a little foreshadowing, that was the woman who was going to essentially get him kicked out of being governor. But see, it's all this thing, it's entrenched politics. The city is always going to be the city. What bothers me is I read another article this morning. You know who Patricia Heaton is? She was Ray Romano's sidekick in Everyone Loves Ray. You know what I'm talking about?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know anything about her.
There's an interesting article this morning that talks about how she is working with this group in Los Angeles to essentially help the victims of the fire. But she doesn't live there anymore. Guess where she lives now, John?
Does she live in Florida?
No, she lives in Nashville, and she talked.
Oh, nice.
And she talked about. She's essentially saying she's like a lot of these very liberal, star potential or star people who are coming out and going like, you know what, the government in California really sort of messed up, and now they're essentially saying, we stood by and supported all these liberal policies of, spending, $800 million for the fire department and $2 billion for the undocumented immigrant, problem and stuff like that. And she's essentially coming out, as a lot of them are, saying, this is why I left Los Angeles. She talks about the fact that she's in Nashville. The people there are friendly. They don't have for that much of a crime problem. There's no state tax. And what's frustrating to me is that should be St. Louis. That should be St. Louis. But why isn't it not? Because of the fact that the crazy antics of the city of St. Louis.
Yeah, because and mostly it's the crime, right? Mostly it's a safety issue. And this is a good time to plug your friend Steve Ellman's line about why people move to St. Charles County, Brad, because I think it's important.
He said this. I've been at several meetings. He said it earlier this month when I was at the 10th anniversary for the St. Charles County Police Department. He says there's two reasons. He says he get asked all the time. He says, why is everybody moving to St. Charles County? He says two reasons: good education and low crime rate, good law enforcement. I mean, and you look at the city of St. Louis, let's look at the last 24 months. Would you consider the regime of Miss Seattle and her cohorts as good education? No. They can't get kids to school on the bus. They don't know how to do that, but yet they can fund what was one of the programs? What was when you kid about all the time? The one that the guy got the grant for Flow.
Oh, Business Flow.
Business Flow.
Brad, I think it's kind of sour grapes because you didn't cash in on Business Flow and you didn't buy a phantom building in North City to get a St. Louis Development Corporation grant.
Or I wasn't a city inspector that was diverting construction money to my wife and my ex-wife, right?
And if you knew somebody, maybe you could get your streets plowed. I don't know if you've seen any of that controversy.
Have you seen the latest? Have you seen the latest thing with this guy? You probably know who this guy is. He's Bogdanovich or whatever his name. You know who I'm talking about?
Denise, the guy named Denise.
Yeah,
Bogdanovich.
Well, but his wife,
like that, yeah.
His wife is something in the city. His wife works for the city or something like that. And
I don't know if it's fair to say that his wife works in the city. Her name's Lindsay Pattan. She does public relations. I don't think it's fair to say that she works for the city. I think she works for a number of nonprofits in the city. I think that's fair.
Well, there's this latest thing that Virvus Jones got his street plowed, and yesterday I was looking at this fight on Twitter where he claims, oh, that wasn't the street, the city, cleaning his street. There are people complaining that how come everybody else is snowed in the city, but yet Virvus Jones get his street, and he points out that look, there's a couple of orange traffic cones. The reason it got plowed is because Spire is doing work on that street, and they plowed the street. And all these other people are piling on going like...
I have seen this, yeah. Well, Spire is notorious for running snowplows all around town. They're leaders in snowplow efficiency.
That's what everybody's saying. They're going like, I don't think, except for Spire owning snowplows to plow out their own, parking facilities where they park their trucks and things like that, I don't think Spire has any trucks that go around in the street with snowplows on it. And I'm going like, okay, here we go again. It's like everybody knows what's going on. It's wink, wink, nod, nod. We got to take care of the mayor's father. You know what I mean? It's just, that's all there is to it. Okay. We have to take a break, and remember, I will refresh your memory and listeners' memory. We're only going to do 2 live breaks this morning because I have to duck out of here. I have to be someplace at 8:15, so I got to drive like a crazy man. Actually, I drive very carefully. It's to the people around me that don't drive carefully who smash into me. I could tell you a story happened to me the other day, John. It's just frustrating to me is when the weather is down to not so good, when the streets are, sort of freezing over and things like that, you get some jerk who passes you at 85 miles an hour on the interstate. You know what I'm saying?
With a death wish.
Yes.
They're the new Charles Bronson. It's ridiculous.
Right. And sometimes, I know this is a horrible thought, but it happened to me years ago where I had a guy literally out in St. Charles County, blinding rain, pass me on 40, must be doing 80 or 90 miles an hour, about a half mile down the road. Guess who smashed into the concrete center divide? It was him. I'm thinking to myself, there is a such thing as karma.